Hi, I'm here today with Brett Ullman, who is a speaker, author, blogger, and vlogger, which is a video blogger. And I'm going to do a screen share. Brett has a wonderful website. And let's just have a look at his bio. There he is with his beautiful family. Brett travels North America, speaking to teens, young adults, leaders, and parents on topics like parenting, mental health, men, sexuality, pornography, dating, and media. His seminars engage and challenge attendees to try and connect our faith with our culture we live in. Participants are inspired to reflect on what we know, what we believe, and how our faith ought to serve as a lens through which we view and engage tough conversations in our society today. And I have heard Brett speak personally. He's a great speaker and a very effective communicator. Husband to Dawn and father of Bennett and Zoe. They make their home in Ajax, Ontario. So he is a local guy. Brett was also a teacher with the Toronto District School Board for 10 years before moving back into speaking in 2005. And Brett has a master's degree in evangelism and leadership from Wheaton School in Chicago and is a graduate of Arrow Leadership Program. All right, I'm going to let that go there. And Brett, so tell us a little bit about how and why you became a professional speaker, and what led you to focus so much on youth and children?
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad to be here. It's interesting because I never planned on being a speaker. It wasn't like I decided I wanted to speak. I was a teacher. I taught for the Toronto District Board for about, I think it was 9.5 years, almost a decade. I taught everything from, I did a class called Section 27. My kids actually came from psychiatric institutions and jail. And this was in grade 8. Like, these were my 7/8s who came in. I did behavior kids. I kind of ended my career in the Malvern community of Scarborough, if people know that region, and taught grade 7 and 8, kind of Rotary science. But I never thought I'd be a speaker. But I went to a conference once and I heard someone speak on media. And I've grown up in the church world where we don't do a good discussion on that. We kind of quickly I was going to say we kibosh. We just don't have conversations. And so I heard a guy speak. And so I came back and began doing some talks. And so I was teaching full time. I have a wife who's a nurse. And so that was kind of our lives. And then I did 2 talks one year and 7 the next year and 14 the next, until I found myself baby at home with my wife, pregnant wife, and teaching full time, speaking 45 dates a year, which is just fully unsustainable.
Right. Sounds hectic.
Yes, I would need a counselor like yourself to help us through those conversations. And so I left teaching, and it was a very tough thing to do, especially in a Canadian paradigm. There's not a lot of full-time speakers, but I began speaking on media. And then I actually, at that point, I brought a talk out on self-harm called The Wounding Embrace. Now, this was 15 plus years ago when we addressed self-harm kind of not under an umbrella of mental health, but we addressed self-harm, suicide, eating disorders almost as separate entities, if you think back to those days.
Yep.
And then that kind of grew, and dating became a talk, and I did a talk for men, really challenging us to be better fathers and husbands and boyfriends. And then more recently, I did a talk on mental health. I actually had a breakdown 8 years ago, actually right after I finished my master's. Ended up spending a year of my life at home, and still, I mean, that was 2012, 2020 now, I still struggle with anxiety, still struggle with panic, which is interesting as a speaker who speaks on mental health. I still struggle with mental health. And then my newest talk is one called Parenting, Navigating Everything, which is really trying to help parents navigate. I mean, we could talk all day on pornography, all day on sex and sexuality, all day on, like, there's so much to do. And I wanted to give parents one resource. And the talk kind of came to be that one. I was at a talk speaking on, I think it was mental health. And a father walked up to me after and said, "Brett, how do I talk to my daughter about sex?" He had a 16-year-old daughter. And
That's
I'm like,
a great question.
Good question. I'm actually really happy a parent asked that. And I went to answer him, and he said, "Oh, wait, by the way, she hates me."
Oh, and she hates me. Okay.
Yeah, and I said, "What?" He goes, "No, forget about that.
You need to go talk to her, Brett. I'll pay you."
But he said, he said, don't worry about that. And I said, what do you mean don't worry about that? He says, no, how do I talk to her about sex? And I'm like, no, forget about sex. What do you mean your daughter hates you? Because if your daughter hates you, you are not talking to her about sex or mental health or pornography
or anything.
Or anything. And I realized that I've spoken topically for many years, but I've never talked about parenting, how to have a good relationship with your kid. How do we have good communication? It's weird in society. I have to tell parents to eat dinners as a family together, but we're in that kind of world today. I had a father say to me, we'd never eat together. It's like buffet dinner with his 3 teens. Everyone goes around the house, and it's like, so I'm teaching basic parenting skills, communication, discipline, those kinds of things. And so that's kind of what I do for a living. Now we're in this new COVID era, so a lot of it is digital, but I mean, a lot of my time was spent in churches, camps, conferences, schools. I get into a lot of schools these days. And for things like mental health, that's both the quote unquote faith-based world as well as public world, because the answer to mental health is not a faith conversation. I love the body, mind, and soul analogy, right? Like it's this holistic view of, eating better and sleeping more and all those kinds of conversations.
Do you find the schools want to hear about pornography and sexuality? Like, do they want to bring speakers in to talk about that?
Mental health, yes. Pornography, sexuality, Catholic school system, yes. Public school system, no.
Right.
And I'm a public school teacher as well. Well, I shouldn't really say that. It's just, they're big topics. Like in a public school, so many people with so many differing views and conversations. It's easier in a classroom than bringing in a speaker. Coming into a Catholic conversation, they want a bit more of a faith conversation. And so, and I think I'm a very practical speaker. So my talk on sex isn't this broad talk on sex and sexuality, LGBTQ issues. That's not really my talk. We're looking at pornography, sexuality, media, sexualized culture, misogyny, violence. Like those are the things we're looking at. And I find students actually, afterwards, I get a lot of, I thought I was going to hate this. It's like, oh, like I actually think that's a nice comment. Like I thought I would hate it. But there's actually
almost a compliment, right?
Yeah, it's like a backhanded compliment.
I thought I'd hate your talk, but I don't hate it.
The truth is, no matter what environment we're in today, like for me, whether it's conferences, churches, camps, schools, public, Catholic, private, students love conversations. I think students are just like, they just love, like I have a going into grade 12 son and a daughter who's heading to Western University next year. So she was in grade 12 this year, but like, when you hear conversations, they love talking in class, they love the debates in class. Like this generation loves that. Their favorite teachers are in the like IAPS and law where they have great debates. I find it's us as adults who are the ones who are more scared of those conversations. And sometimes I find that's more in the faith-based world.
Yeah.
Is we have to actually have real conversations on what we believe, not just because we've always believed something. And so, but I find out kids love conversation no matter what.
It sounds like your approach is not so much talking at them, it's more sharing with them or listening as well as talking. It's a two-way.
Yeah.
It's a two-way. Are your presentations interactive, or is there a time at the end where you have sort of this Q&A or group talk a bit? Or
it's all different. My mental health, like when you're in a school, like I did a Catholic tour last year. It was the Halton region, so it was like 9 or 10 high schools. When you have 1,500 or 1,000 kids in a gym, there's no interaction.
It's too many.
If it's a classroom, for sure. But I'm also a different speaker. Like I think I have like 7 topics I speak on, but I've been speaking for 2.5 decades. And so it's,
wow.
But I want to do what I do well. So if I speak on, let's say pornography, I would take 2 years before I bring out a talk on pornography. And I would talk to people like yourself and others, and what books are you reading? And then when I'm reading a book and they quote someone else, I'd buy that book. And then I don't want just the trend or what someone says is an issue. Like I want to know what are the real topics. I want to talk to thousands of kids and parents and hear all the conversations and help people walk that pathway.
Yeah. I know you read a lot of books, Brett. Is it like 2 a week or something?
Yeah, and during COVID, sometimes more. Now, not every book, this might sound weird, but not every book deserves to be read cover to cover.
Right.
Like,
There's skimming and there's reading, right? Yeah.
yeah, and so like if I'm reading a book and there's great content, I write it in the front cover. I'd turn to page, I'd say like page 5, and I'd say quote from whoever. But if I'm in the 3rd chapter and I've underlined nothing and quoted nothing, I may skim forward a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, but like I do read a lot.
Now, speaking of books, Brett, I understand that you have recently had one published. Would you care to share it? Show us.
I would. And this is my new book called Parenting, Navigating Everything.
I love the cover.
Yeah, I love the paddles.
Yeah.
And if you look closely, it's actually paddles on paddles. It's hard to see, but my designer,
okay.
it's a really cool kind of effect.
Yeah.
But this is actually based after, and I think I have this book here too. This is called the Anxiety and Phobia Workbook. You've probably seen this before.
Yeah.
But at the bottom, they had all the different things, for mental health. So I love when I speak on mental health. Love this book, mainstream book. So there's no faith conversation. So I can speak this anywhere. But like panic, relaxation, exercise, medication. And my wife kind of said, we were talking about parenting. So I was going to do a book with parenting conversations, which is the first 6 chapters of this. And she said, well, you have kind of like that book with all your other topics. And so for me, like the bottom are all the different topics that I speak on.
Yeah. And it's thick too. It's huge. How many words is this?
226,000.
Wow.
But the goal was, rather than having, I could make the first 6 chapters into one book on parenting. And then, there's 10 more chapters, but each of those, like mental health could be a book, pornography could be a book, like some mini books, some not. But I wanted to give parents something, like here's what you
one-stop shop kind of thing.
Yeah, because I think parents, I don't think we should be picking and choosing which topics matter and which ones don't. Like, it's not like your kid has anxiety, well, we'll address that, but they haven't talked about pornography, so we don't need to worry. Like, each of these topics are important topics. And so I wanted to have it all there. And also, it might mean today mental health is your issue, but next week your kid's asking about dating. And so I kind of wanted everything to be there kind of in one place.
I like that. We don't get to pick and choose what topics are important.
Even though something might be more important in the moment for you.
Yeah. That's good because that sort of forces us as parents out of our, and not just as parents, as therapists, social workers, child and youth workers, it pushes us out of our comfort zone to ask, maybe those difficult questions or go into some of those challenging areas, that maybe, and because I come across this in this whole discussion about, sexualized culture and what kids, pornography. A lot of people are still uncomfortable really talking about that, but maybe we'll come back to that later. I want to kind of move on, Brett, to just, what you've been running into. Like, I'm doing this workshop to give my viewers that are watching this online at the conference, the issues that children and youth today are facing. Like, the theme of the conference is protecting the underserved and vulnerable in our population. So it's a whole different world today, as you well know, like from when you and I were growing up. Everyone has a smartphone. Everyone's using apps. Everyone is, the very way that they relate to each other is being affected and influenced and shaped by this technology. Let's bring in porn, let's bring in sexual predators, all of that stuff. So as you travel and speak to kids, like what are you hearing from them, and what's been your, what are sort of some of the stories from the front lines, and what's your take on it?
I mean, it's fascinating because that question we could spend 10 hours on. Just because
we only got one, Brett. 1 hour. And I know that's a big one, and you're right. And maybe we can do some follow-up talks on that. But if you can try to give a 5-minute answer to it.
So smartphones are everything, especially in a kid's life. But the truth is, we say that, and my phone, like, have you ever left your house without your smartphone? We feel.
Oh, no, keys, phone, wallet. I check it 20 times a day. Keys, phone, wallet. So
I put a video out for parents saying, at what age should a kid get a smartphone? Because I have a YouTube channel where I do these, other than this summer, I'm kind of taking a bit of time off right now, but I do these videos for parents, answering the questions that parents ask me at a talk, and then I can
What's the channel, Brett? Just so we can check it out
well,
later.
if you go to the BrettUllman.com, that's the main site, which is mine.
Yeah.
All my social media is at the top, and
Okay.
YouTube is the top one on there.
Yeah, I'll post your site up on the wherever I'm posting it. I'll post it. Okay.
But the video I put out was on, when should you get a phone? I'm a big fan of the Wait to 8 campaign. I think around that middle school years is a pretty, they're at the age where they can understand phones, a bit like the responsibility for them.
Mm-hmm.
This video I put out's been kind of hijacked by young tweens and even below that. And it's been seen 17,000 times, and every day there's these comments. So but it's all I got my first phone in kindergarten. I got my first phone in grade 1. Like my dad's buying me a new iPhone next week, and it's the kid's I'm in grade 3.
Wow.
I heard of a parent who said to me after one of my talks, because I was talking about phones, and I think I was talking about around grade 8, it's a pretty good thing. And he said him and his wife were talking, maybe we shouldn't have given our kindergarten kid a brand new iPhone with a full data plan.
And he's serious.
And I looked at him waiting for the smirk,
waiting for the punchline.
And he was serious. And I didn't really know, but see, this is the problem. We talk about pornography and these other things, but it's this parenting conversation. Why on earth would a parent ever think that a kid in kindergarten needs a smartphone? If you want to get them a phone, you can get a kid phone, which is a flip phone, which can call home and 911.
Yeah.
But the idea that they need a full data plan, kids can't, even a kid in middle school, how do you process the violent sexuality and other things you might see on porn, whether you look for it or it comes to you or someone sends it to you? But how do you deal with that when you're in kindergarten?
Completely irresponsible and unbelievably naive of that parent to think that that's somehow a good idea. I hope you told them that. What'd you tell them? You slap him?
I think I bit my, I want to tell him he's an idiot.
Right.
People
Fair
don't
enough.
take well to that, and it's not a good thing for the speaker.
But
I had to kind of walk through for him, what does he think his kindergarten kid will do when he clicks on something it takes him to a pornographic website or something, and he didn't really know what to say. And as a side note, no accountability, no filters.
Yeah, no filter, no, yeah. Wow. Oh.
Now, thinking on your big question.
That's scary.
I think one of my big worries today is that phones and technology give us access. I mean, even Netflix. I mean, what's that movie 365 that came out?
Yeah.
Graphic, not only violent, misogynistic, but talk about Stockholm syndrome, and this person is now sleeping with the person who kidnapped her. But that's just Netflix. So porn, whether it's in your phone, a computer, a smartphone, is becoming kind of the new sex education for kids today. And that terrifies me, that is what people think might be normal. I was reading an article the other week, and I forget who wrote it, but it was a therapist, a counselor like yourself, who was saying often she had people come through her doors who were students who, it was always, she said, young men who had enacted things that they were seeing in porn with their girlfriends, and their girlfriends didn't like it, and they were really confused at why they didn't enjoy it in the movies. And she went on to kind of say it's all fake, right? There's a third person with a camera, and it's and I think it was not Melinda Tankert Rice, Gail Dines once said, I forget how she worded it, but it was kind of no one has ever told these boys that that's not you. You don't have to be that. And so that kind of concerns me. I also hear a lot of stories from kids who are questioning these things, but it's they're questioning them in a vacuum and they have no one to talk to. A lot of young girls are getting a lot of, can I just say dick pics? They're getting a lot of the.
Oh yeah. This isn't a G-rated presentation, so don't hold back.
It's funny. Sometimes I speak and I'll say that, and someone's upset after that I said dick pics, and I'm like,
no, we're not in church.
The concept of what I'm talking about, and they're like, but I'm upset at what you said. I'm like, well, how will you talk about it with your kid? And it's what a red herring we're arguing about. But a lot of young girls would be sent these photos that they didn't.
Unsolicited.
they didn't want unsolicited,
Mhm.
and they don't know how to deal with it. And they're coming and talking to me. Like I am kind of similar to you in a different way. Like they're coming to me because I come to their environment and they can come and ask me without fear. They don't know me. I don't
Yeah,
know their family. And
you're
so,
non-judgmental.
but it scares me that they're having to think through these things. And too often, it's a young girl and she's already sent a photo back. And that guy has, and I mean, it goes both ways, but I find the majority is men asking women for that.
I'd say
And
that's 90% or higher from what I'm hearing as well.
but it's the stories that scare me, like of the girl who did, and then and then the guy begins to blackmail, give me more, do this, and then it ends up going to person. Now we're heading into a version of sex, right? Like
Yeah.
you can
So
see
that
how all
the
these things go down different roads. Not that they all do.
sextortion. Have you heard that phrase,
Yeah.
sextortion? Right. Okay. Because that's coming up too, and that was a new one for me. I mean, I'm pretty up on this stuff, but you know, I have a picture of you, in your underwear, and I need full nudies, or this is going to everyone on your contact list or your family. I mean, it's blackmail basically. And it's like, so we got these 14-year-old kids acting like, some thug in the mafia or something, blackmailing them. Sorry, keep going. Yeah.
But there's so much to that. Like
Mhm.
I say, like in my dating talk, asking for pictures or giving pictures is a red flag. Like, how are we teaching our young men that it's normal to write a girl and say, like, give me a photo of you naked? Like, if I came up to someone on the street and just said that, the police would be called.
Right.
So
That
it's this,
would be assault or harassment.
and if I just sent an unsolicited photo to someone else, it's the same. So it's this, it's not okay here, but we're fine with it here. But this is weird education of how we're training other generations. So there's just so much dysfunction, and kids don't seem to often. There are many great parents, but there are a lot of parents who are just uninvolved. They're not around. I mean, absentee fathers, and absentee fathers is not just guys, who are just not there. There's also absentee fathers with men in the home where they're just not involved with
Not emotionally
family and
there.
with the kids and emotionally and other things. And so what's hard is you see that one nude image this girl sends, and you see the parenting issue, you see her lack of sex education. And I'm not talking about watching that movie on Netflix, like actual discussions on, like, there's all of these tangents that need to be had. And I just feel not sad, I just feel angry sometimes that it's like we're sending kids off, and war is a hard, and no offense to anyone who's been to war, but like it's like we're sending them off to this battle with no protection, with no knowledge,
Yeah.
and then they get hurt and we still don't want to address it. Someone who's gone through those things needs a counselor or therapist to walk through them, but it's like we never address it, and then we wonder why things happen.
Yeah. I'm hearing a lot of the same things from other people I'm talking to, and it's I think Melinda called it the great social experiment, which is a phrase I've used before as well, and because of, in my talks I call it the unprecedented situation. Never before in the history of the human race have so many people had so much access to so much hardcore sexual material. And what you and I are, what you just finished talking about is the consequences or the ramifications that we're beginning to see of that. And I think that we're, I don't know how that plays out. Let's say a generation, what's that, 30 years? So, there's where we are now, there's where we're going to be in 5 years, 10 and 15 years. And I think that we need to have a long-term perspective on this, which is, part of why I'm talking to people like you and other experts that are there on the front lines, where it's going down, and talking to youth and kids. And, I work mostly with adults, but the guy that comes into my office, who, has never gone 2 weeks without masturbating to pornography, is the kid that you're talking to now in grade 8, who has access to unlimited hardcore pornography. So we're you're more on this end, and I'm more like that guy 10 years later. And
Mm.
I think you said something earlier about a holistic approach, and I think it's time for us to all start thinking way more critically about these issues, sociologically, philosophically, from a mental health perspective, from if you're a person of faith, from a faith perspective, although that's not necessary by any means, from a moral perspective, from an equality perspective, a sociological perspective. What does this mean about relationships? What does this mean about equality for women? The Me Too movement. And it's so ironic to me that we have the Me Too movement over here and complete and total media silence on the devastation of our youth by how porn is socializing them into everything they're fighting against. So everything they're fighting against, we're feeding it over here with giving these kids unlimited access to these smartphones.
It was a couple of years ago.
No, go ahead.
I watched, I think it was the VMAs, one of the Video Music Awards. And I think it was 2 years ago. And so there's all these speeches of hashtag Me Too, which is really good. People are being held accountable for things. Now, like any movement, you begin with people being held accountable. Like what was the TV show on Apple TV Plus? The Morning Show. It was a good I don't know if you ever saw that. It was on Me Too, looking at Steve Carell, Reese Witherspoon, Jennifer Aniston, like a news show and all these different things. But like it begins and it's great, and then some people, someone said someone hugged me too long. Like sometimes there's too much, but the vast main conversation was great. So in this music awards, there were these speeches, but after one of the speeches, everyone's giving a standing ovation, and out comes Rihanna singing "You Want to See Me Naked, Naked, Naked," and a bunch of half-naked backup dancers. Everyone's still cheering for Me Too.
Oh no!
And I'm like, how do you talk about Me Too without dealing with the objectification of women? And even the song of the night went to Bruno Mars. Remember that song? I'm not going to say all the lyrics right, but like "Champagne on Ice," "Trips to France." Like, I forget how many words, like 553 words, 8 different people wrote it, including Bruno. Not one word of dating, love, relationships, or marriage. It was all this weird transactional. If you give me this, I will give you this. Mm-hmm. And we wonder why kids are confused.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah. I think that youth are so, I don't know if indoctrinated by our culture. Indoctrinated is the right word, but they're so indoctrinated that the hypocrisy is really obfuscated. They don't see the hypocrisy in that, right? And it's always been a little weird to me how celebrities seem to get away with pretty much anything, Yeah. So okay. Anyway, well, we could we could go off on that for a while, but let's talk about Kiona on the article on your website, and just share a bit about that for a second. And for those that are wondering, you can go on Brett's website, and it's there, Kiona article about her. But I just wanted you to just share your why is that up there? What is it that gripped you about that you posted that?
So on my website, what I like to do is I don't often just do here's my big blog. I like to just give people, it's like a landing place of great information. So this article about Kiona, I forget her last name, but she's a grade 12 girl. I think she was in the East Coast, and
grade 12.
CBC did this thing on her. So she's in grade 12, and she did, it was on basically the question of like, all kids today are being asked for nudes. And so she created kind of a curriculum for grade, I think it was 9s and 10s. But she said a line, I want to read it here. She said, many of the adults in our lives are unaware of the issues going on with our youth. And it just, when it's normal for kids today to start sending photos back and forth, and we talked a bit about this a minute ago, but without looking at the consequences of what that is. I mean, the truth is it is child pornography you're sending back and forth. I mean, so it's not like police always charge people, but they could. And then
technically, it's child porn, yeah.
and the guy who's sending it around is sending around child porn.
Distributing child porn, yeah.
But we don't want to. The goal is not to fear kids into not doing things. The goal is to teach them why it's something that's probably not good. And she talks a bit about how the comparison. She talks a bit about how, you know, her generation today, every girl. I mean, when she says every, I don't like words like every, but talks about girls hate their bodies. They all look on Instagram and compare. You know, somebody took 100 photos to get that one photo that looks right. So you're comparing your day-to-day life with someone's kind of like highlight reel. And then she just talks about how guys today are just raised on porn and video games. And I'm not anti-video game. I like video games, but I do think video games.
I play a bit of Halo here and there, Brett. You want to play an online game sometime?
We'll connect with that later.
Okay.
But the problem with video games is that it's taken away from guys actually being outside and guys actually having a lot of relationships and other things. Yeah. Guys can still do homework and stuff and be gamers. But I was at, it was a university in Ontario, I forget which one. I had about 1,000 students in the room. And a study just came out saying that guys today are out of sync with real world relationships. And they said a lot of it's because of video games. Women finish gaming and women are gamers and they would sit and have coffee with someone or talk to someone. Guys game, you know, you're in your house, I'm in my house, and we have a headset and we game. And I said, who thinks this is true? Every girl in the room put up her hand. I said, who thinks it's not true? Every guy in the room put up their hand. And I'm like, guys, like,
wow.
And so I liked that article just because it was, again, I'm very careful with articles, especially these, like whether it's politics or COVID, everyone has opinions.
Yeah.
But this is just an article from a girl who lives in this, like, you know, she's in this generation, part of this generation, and then trying to change what we think is the norm. Like, it's not just, well, that's just the way it is. Yeah. I often say to students, you're going to look at me and say, like, I'm 49. It's like, you'll say, well, you're old. You don't get how we express ourselves sexually. And I would say, I am old compared to you. I hope I don't feel old, but yeah. But I would say, but it's not like I don't have a steady stream of people your age coming to me saying, my picture's now all over my school, and my picture's now all over the internet. What do I do? And so if that's what a lot of people are getting, maybe the way you're expressing yourself sexually isn't a good way to do that. And there's a better way. And so this is where we have good conversations on prevention before it happens, because there's not much we can do after it's done.
Well, and you know, when you're talking about that comment of, you know, this is how we express ourselves, and it occurred to me at some point, I don't know, in the last couple of years, doing this, well, the work I do and the research on the porn industry is that sex, I guess there's two things. Boundaries is one. So when you describe the activity of youth and children, I'm thinking, where are the boundaries? And the other thing is that sexuality, it seems like it has become completely untethered from anything. So in the past, sexuality was, and I'm not saying these are good or bad things, I'm just kind of thinking about how it was tethered to, say, reproduction. It was tethered to monogamy. It was tethered to faithfulness. It was tethered to love, right? Mm. And now it's not tethered to any of those things. So what does that mean? And I don't know, and I'm not even looking for an answer, you know, right now, but it's just the fact that without boundaries, there's harm that comes to people, I think, is what I'm seeing, right? And so, yeah, maybe that is how you express your sexuality, but it's not tethered to anything and there's no boundaries. So chances are you're probably going to be hurt. And, you know, Melinda has, oh my gosh, I mean, she's seen it all, but I mean, you know, girl sends a nudie, then he shares it. She gets mad and breaks up with him. He posts it on a revenge porn site. She gets slut shamed and then kills herself a month later. Like, I can't think of anything more tragic for the parents of that girl.
And even the reason that girl,
no boundaries.
And the reason that girl first did it is often coming from like, it's, well, everyone does it, or that's just the way it is today. And it's like, says who?
Yeah.
Just because some guy wants to see a topless picture of you and all guys do want to see that, she would say, like, but that doesn't make it right. And that doesn't mean you should do it. And it's okay to actually say, no, I'm not going to do that. And if that guy doesn't like you or doesn't want to be with you, you don't want to be with him anyways. But it's this peer pressure without the, like, in my parenting talk, I talk a lot for parents about how we need to have this foundation at home. Leonard Sachs talks about this in his book, Collapse of Parenting. Gabor Mate and, oh, I forget who it was, Hold On to Your Kids, book out of, I think it was Western Canada, like, create this foundation where your kids are attached to you and then they go attached to their peers. And how attachment parenting is so important, because if my daughter knows and my family knows, and if all girls and boys know that this is the foundation that they have at home, they don't need to go and do that or ask for that or be that. But without that tether, without that attachment, they're kind of left to just, well, society says we should. Well, society who? Like modern musicians today who just sing about sex and swearing and alcohol and drug, like that's who we should be following. So that's why, again, parenting is such a root issue for so much of what we're talking about today.
Yeah. Just briefly, Brett, there's another article. Mom goes undercover as an 11-year-old. And what jumped out at you about that you were posting that?
I dislike articles that are fear-based. I always tell my parents and people when I speak, like, if you ever get an article, 10 apps you have to delete off your phone or your kid's phone, it's like, delete. Like, it's not about the app, it's about what you do with the app. And so I'm not a fear-based person, but I clicked on this one, and this was a woman who works for a company called Bark. I think it's bark.usa, and I'll talk about the app in a minute, but she put up a fake profile, and at first it was for a 15-year-old girl. And I wrote the stats down here. So she put up a profile, like they actually took her, like changed, I think she's 37, so they changed her face, changed the aging, made her look like a young, 15-year-old girl.
They photoshopped a 30-year-old's face into a 15-year-old's face.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they went live on Instagram. And within the first hour, 7 men contacted her. And after 9 hours, it was 92 men who had contacted the girl.
92 men?
92.
In 2 hours?
Yeah. It took 5 people on her team to keep up with all the communication. And so they actually changed, and they stopped that, and they actually went down and made the girl 11 years old.
Wow.
And they said, and so on the video, she clicked live, and I don't know if you see her click live, but you see the countdown. And at 26 seconds, a guy whose profile is his penis likes her. And then comes within 5 minutes, someone's trying to video with her. And then they actually had a guy who wanted to have sex with her. And they met up with him in New York City with the police. It was kind of this thing. Remember years ago, those houses they'd set up and they'd invite someone over, and what's that guy's name? To Catch a Predator. Chris Hansen or whatever. But it was kind of like this. And there's this guy with his face blurred telling this girl he wants to sleep with her. And it just, like, how are we teaching our kids? Like, well, when the guy was with her, pressure, go to the room, pressure. Like, yeah. It reminded me a bit of I don't know if you've watched the Jeffrey Epstein thing on Netflix, but
you know what? I just started yesterday. Very interesting, isn't it?
But the girls who were groomed to come and do this,
yeah,
not all, but a lot, divorced families, low relationship.
Yeah.
And I kind of saw this girl being pressured. And I'm like, wow, like you can see, now that wasn't this girl, it was actually the mom who, I don't know how the guy didn't realize she's not 11, but how are we equipping and empowering our kids to deal with this? How are we equipping and empowering our young men to not be like that guy? How are we dealing with all of those things? And that's kind of what I like what we're doing today, because no matter where you're listening to this, we all have to get involved in making sure that that's not going to happen. And it's happening all the time these days.
Yeah. Why do you think we're seeing, I mean, I think we kind of know the answer to this, but why are we talking about what's going on now this, these things weren't happening 10 or 20 years ago.
There was a push. There was a push kind of in the 90s of like, it's been kind of this thing for a few decades. You do you would never, like, what you do is fine. No one can tell anyone what they can and can't do. But with that, we've seen this growth of people doing things that are not okay. Like, I don't care about, like, if me telling you can't send a naked pic to an 11-year-old girl as an adult, if you think that's, if I have to say, well, you do you, like,
yeah,
we're living in a crazy society. There has to be some things that we're like, that's not okay.
Yeah.
And so part of this do whatever you want in life has come back with some ramifications. The collapse of family, the busyness of life where parents are now not involved with their kids, even though parents are more involved this generation than the last generation. They're much more involved. Even during COVID, parents, especially fathers, are much more involved. But it's not saying everything's good with parenting. So busyness, I think busyness is a big one. I mean, each of those things, I don't know why we're not, like, we talk about sex trafficking and, they'll arrest a bunch of people and they're out of jail very quickly. It's like, there's a mix of the law and what judges and court, like, there's all this stuff that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great answer, but it wasn't the answer I expected. I thought you would just say, because of the black rectangle. Talk about the black rectangle. How is this, has this not changed everything? Or, I don't know, are we belaboring the point? I think people get it, right? It's there, it's with you, it's accessible, and they're getting it in grade 1 with no filters or restrictions.
I have 11 videos on YouTube that talk about how to have a better relationship with your phone.
Okay.
I think we're addicted to these.
Yeah.
Even as adults, I think that there's an issue
that I got a text coming in here. Okay,
but every time, like, even as we're talking, my Apple Watch taps me. Every time I get a dopamine hit to the head.
You do?
Same dopamine hit I would get if I'm looking at pornography, if I'm intimate with someone, even getting a hug or a kiss. But our phones are doing this. And so there are issues with this. I forget how many times we open our phone a day, but it's something like once every 8 minutes. Like, we hold it and touch it in the thousands of times per day. Like, I touch. If you're at a restaurant, people spin it and turn it. Wow. So it's just looking at, and I'm really big on habits. How do we just get better than where we're at? So if you're touching your phone 2,000 times a day, how do we make it 1,500? Turning off notifications. Now, pornography is another conversation with this, but the phones have just created availability to everything. So first, get a handle on our phones and using phones. For students, the need that you have to reply in a second to someone on Instagram, what we think we need to post, we can be different. And then with this, the idea that we're just handing someone, I forget who just talked about, like, this is like porn in your pocket. Like, yes, you can get porn here, but you can also get porn here. You get porn on your PS4 or, Xbox downstairs. And so I think phones are an issue, but pornography, I get it on Netflix today. And so pornography is so pervasive. Phones are part of where you can get that from anywhere in society.
Can you sum up for us the ways that accidental exposure to online porn can be harmful to children? So and I say children and not teens because I think they're harmful to both, but in different ways. And just so people are clear, and I may have said this somewhere else, but when we talk about porn, Brett, like I still run into people that think I'm referring to Playboy magazine. Did you ever hear that, or they think you're talking about Playboy? Usually they're older, people in their 50s and stuff like that, right? So anyway, what we're talking about, Brett, is graphic, hardcore, mostly violent, depictions of every sex act you can possibly imagine. 90% of the time there's verbal and or physical violence from the man to the woman. 80% of the time the woman has a facial expression of pleasure or neutrality. There is a lot of terrible names that I won't mention that are being, women are called terrible names, and most online porn contains choking, slapping, spitting, urinating on, kicking, punching, beating, and other terrible forms of abuse embedded within the pornography itself. So that's what I mean when I say porn. So how does this harm children coming across this?
What's funny is, like, if anyone listening doesn't think that any of that stuff's harmful, there's just such a concern.
Yeah.
I actually use a broader term for porn, that porn is anything that's designed to turn you on or arouse you sexually.
Well, let's go with that.
Meaning that, like, porn can go beyond that to heading into, massage parlors, escort services, and that kind of stuff, even online chatting. And before that, even going to, if you're heading out, if you're at a Rexall pharmacy or Shoppers Drug Mart and your 4-year-old's checking out and the magazine at her eye level talks about, 3 great ways anal sex can improve your sex life. And it's kind of
cosmopolitan, like, you mean, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's like, so the concern I have is that for anyone, just someone putting out something that everything is just normal, just, you have sex with anyone, do whatever you like. We're not even talking about parameters around what sex is and what it's not. But heading into the younger people, the normalization of any of that any kid would, and looking at like internet pornography, which is the big one, and believe that that's normal. Believe that girls need to provide a porn experience for men, that men believe that they're owed for some reason a sex experience from women. First off, the weird thing that sex is about men, it's just not. Like, if people think that's what it is and they're gonna get married, they're gonna have a hard time in marriage. If sex is about guys, which in porn, sex is all about the men.
Yeah, and their gratification.
Right, the man gets off and everything's fine. Now, it's all about the guy. Yeah. Then you have the people who copy that. Now, I don't believe everyone who watches porn rushes out and rapes someone, even though there are some people who do, but that's not what we're saying. But people copy that in marriage. People copy that in relationships. But I think, too, there's just the disconnect. Like, none of this is about love, marriage, relationships, and dating. It's just about people and body parts and everything else. And so there's a disconnect between intimacy and all those things and just the self-gratification. And as you move forward in relationship with someone, in time hopefully getting married, those things don't collide well. And I think people will be heading into counseling offices to deal with addictions and other things. I love that one of the greatest groups that I see in the world trying to break people free from porn, like, for me, it's not people in the church world. It's actually 20-something non-faith-based guys. Yeah. Like the no fat movement, I just so love.
Yeah.
Because they're suddenly saying, I can't get aroused by my girlfriend anymore. Why? And they're realizing that porn-induced erectile dysfunction is a big deal. And they're learning how their brains have been changed. And they're all like, why has no one ever told this before?
Yeah.
And so when I'm in a school speaking and I bring up those, like Maclean's magazine says 1 in 3 guys, college-age men, can't sustain an erection anymore. I now have the attention of every single guy in the room who just thinks porn's a joke and I'm not going to follow the violence. But whether you are, whether you're not, there's so many things that to me just cause harm to kids. There's nothing to process. Kids can't we have a hard time processing the violence as adults. Yeah. Let alone being 10, 15. It's just, there's nothing, we don't have a paradigm to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you touched on this like a bit in your answer, but what are the essential messages? So what I heard you say so far, the essential messages that porn teaches, and let's look at porn as teaching a vessel or a mode of instruction in a sense. Women are objects that exist for the gratification, the sexual gratification of men. Nothing's off limits. Love isn't needed or necessary. Women are meant to be dominated and controlled by men. Men are entitled to sexual gratification in any way they want it. Men don't have to contribute anything emotionally. Porn isn't about the woman's sexual satisfaction. What else do you think? I'm just kind of summarizing a little bit of, what you've mentioned already. Can you think of anything else?
It's funny, it brings to mind, I've been listening to a podcast for a few years by a woman named Sheila Gregoire. Do you know that name? So she's out of, I think it's Belleville, I might be wrong, but she has a podcast called To Love, Honor, and Vacuum. But it's basically, she's a faith-based woman speaking about sex to people. And it's like, first off, I don't see many people speaking about sex, yet alone in our small faith-based community. But a lot of it is about sex being for both people. And that's the one thing I really appreciate her viewpoint is it's not just, it's made for men and women do whatever it takes to satisfy the man. It's meant to be this mutual thing that people, it's for each person. But everything we're talking about is really about this narcissism of men of just, I get what I want. But there's no reciprocal anything. Porn is just about the guy for the most part. Of course, it's not all about that way, but everything. What you said, I agree with. All of those things, and they're all bad. Like, there's nothing we can look forward and say, well, 10 years more into this, we'll be in a better place. Like, I don't want to have another, 20 years of young men coming through and women and all this and seeing where they're at in 20 years. I think therapists will be overwhelmed at that point. Even today, the number of young married couples where the guy's addicted to porn is through the roof as I travel, and many women as well. Just porn to see, and then there's these expectations that come from that.
Yeah.
We want good, healthy sex lives. We want good, healthy marriages. This isn't helping.
So, yeah. So where do you see us as a culture, let's say the US and Canada, because we're similar, I think, in 10 years from now? And it's good because there's a part of me, the cynical part of me says we've already lost this battle. It's not even close, okay? There was 93 billion videos watched on Pornhub last year or something. Like, the numbers are really, truly mind-boggling, right? And women under 30, I'd say, they don't even know a guy that doesn't watch porn. Like, that's what they tell me. Like, they literally don't know anyone they can date that doesn't watch porn. So, and then, there's part of me that says, like, just to get out of bed and show up every day, I have to have some faith and hope that things could change or get better. So where do you see us in maybe 10 years? And the parallel all that's been made often, Brett, to this is that pornography is a public health crisis. And in order to change the cultural perception of this, it's going to take about a generation. And it's often, there's a comparison drawn to the cigarette industry. So in the 60s and 70s, smoking was cool. Doctors would be featured in ads with their white lab coats with a cigarette in their mouth saying how they prescribe. It's kind of funny to see this now, but there's old ads out there if you go online, how they recommend, having a quick puff to relieve your anxiety. And we laugh at this stuff. And then there was a whole industry that grew just to fight the research about the harms of tobacco. And that went on for about 10 years. There's a Russell Crowe movie about that called, I think it's The Insider or something like that.
I think so.
And here we are. Smoking isn't cool, right? So that's, I guess I kind of draw a little bit of hope from that. Like it took a generation, but through massive public education and people like yourself and others speaking out and a huge body of research that finally became indisputable. Where do you think we're going with this?
I read an article about women in Europe recently, and it was just saying that they're not getting married anymore.
Hmm.
And they're saying that they will adopt or use artificial insemination for a child. And the overall thing was that I don't need another child. I'm looking for a partner. And if I can't find a partner, I'm not going to marry someone who's not like, so I'll just do it on my own.
Oh.
And I remember thinking, you know, Europe's always been a little bit ahead of us in some ways. And I just look at, like, I hear a never-ending story when I'm traveling from women in their 20s, late 20s, early 30s, looking for a guy. And it's always like the immaturity, the video games, and it's like we have a delayed adolescence issue. Leonard Sachs wrote a book called Boys Adrift, which was a really good book on this conversation, in that this is not all men. There are some good men out there, but there are way too many men who are being socialized by pornography, who play. There was one quote in one of these books. Some girl said, oh, she's doing an internship, and this guy says, I play about 40 hours a week of video games. And, you know, her comment was like, that's how long my internship is each week. And then another guy said in a date, oh, like, look, she owns a home. And her comment was like, well, I'm 35. Like that, like, it's just the delayed adolescence in men today is an issue, and it's a growing issue. Now, it's a parenting issue because our over-functioning is making men under-function. Like when especially moms, but some dads make their kids lunches in university or even high school, your kid will under-function. We're not teaching kids how to function. We need to equip our kids, right? Like it's teaching your kids and launch. Remember that movie Failure to Launch from a few decades ago? Like the goal is to take our kids to teach them, to launch them out into life and marriage.
Right.
And men today, like some of the stats, like 1 in 4 20-year-old men don't work anymore. Like not looking for work, just don't work. They're just at home and their parents are just cook, like, what do you want for dinner? And they're cooking them dinner. Like they're just like these kept kids at home. And then they're wondering why nobody wants to marry them. Andy Stanley, who's a pastor in the US, in one of his books says, are you the person you're looking for is looking for? And you have to think through that. But it's like, when you're dating, are you the person that you're looking for is looking for? If you find that, like for me, if I find that girl that I want to marry, and I've been married 23 years, but if I find that girl, would she look back at me and say, yeah, you're the one? If I'm a guy today and I'm playing 40 hours a week of video games and I'm failing out of school, like more women head off to college, university, more women are doing well in school. If guys think education, like doing well, is bad, what a stupid viewpoint. Like education gives you options and choices in life to go make money, to have a good life. But like, we're not the people, you know, we're addicted to porn. Many of us, we're struggling, you know, just with basic things. We're just at home living in our basement and we're wondering why someone would want to marry us. Well, how's that going to be 10 years from now?
So you're saying at another level, unless we address almost this crisis of masculinity in our culture, it's going to be a hard uphill battle in seeing a change in attitude toward using porn.
Men have kind of just accepted that as the norm, as opposed to wanting to be with a real woman.
Yeah.
Who has ideas and thoughts and opinions.
Yeah.
It's easy to be with some fake image on a screen. Well, but that, how does that work for you? To quote Dr. Phil, 5 years down the road, like,
how's that working out for you? Yeah. Okay, Brett. Thanks so much for your great insights. I want to wrap up. Let's leave my viewers with a challenge on what they can do to protect youth and children. What they can, there's going to be a lot of resources that'll be available to them, but what would your challenge be to them to start making a difference on this issue?
So I have two, and the first might not be what most people think. I think the biggest thing we need to do is to have parents be better parents, because the most influential people in kids' lives are their parents. It's not us as speakers, therapists, educators. Like, we're assets to parents, but kids in our homes, right, we're their parents. And so how can we equip and empower? And I always say too, it's about teaching, it's not about telling. It's not saying porn is bad. Why is porn bad? It's not saying do dishes. Why do, like, you do dishes because you're part of a family and you made dishes dirty. Like, so it's not just about making a blanket statement and saying don't, but it's about equipping parents. And one of the biggest things is that parents need to have, so there's a curriculum that some churches in Canada and the US use called Orange, and they talk about influence, and there's two lines. So the orange, like the color orange curriculum. Oh. It talks about two kinds of influence, and this is the one we're missing: our relational influence. Positional influence. When you have a kid, you have it. As your kid gets older, it goes down to nothing. I have an 18 and an almost 17-year-old. Positional influence. Do this because I'm your dad. That doesn't. They might have to do that for a bit, but like, you lose the positional influence. Relational influence begins at nothing and it grows. It's the relationship which gives you the opportunity to teach, equip, and empower and talk to your kid about these things. So that to me is such a foundation that I can then speak to my kids about dating and sex and pornography and healthy living and mental health and sleep and all these other conversations. So parenting is the first. And the teaching in that, explaining, like, it's not just don't look at porn again, it's why. But two, I love some of the apps that are out today just for monitoring. And this is, I think, for younger kids. But like Disney has the thing called Circle, which if I had mine, it's not a circle.
Clients have told me about it, yeah.
But it's not a circle, it's a square. Like, it's the weirdest marketing. It's a square called Circle. But you throw that onto your router. I'm pointing to my router. You put it onto your router.
Over there, okay.
And you would attach kids, like, kids don't just usually get phones first. Like, my kids got an iPad first. This is kind of the normal progression. Or your kids get your older phones with no data plans.
Right.
But you attach it. You can see what your kids do. Like, the truth is, Apple iOS, which I'm an Apple guy, you can set up family settings and you can see how long. But here's what we do in our family. It's not about, I want to see what you do. It's about, so we have a yearly family meeting. We talk about what we're going to do. You know, how do we be the best people we can be? Vacations. Do you need new shoes for gym class? Whatever. But one of them is just about being good on our phones. And so we all run that app and we can see how much time we're spending on our phones. Even as adults, you should be seeing how many hours a week you're on your phones. And so I love that. You can turn it off at 10 o'clock at night. You can do, anyways, you can monitor, you can say they can go on certain sites or not. But my favorite, well, I also run OpenDNS. Have you heard of that one before?
Yep.
So OpenDNS you run on your router. And what I love about that is it blocks not all, but a vast majority of porn, because it's router to, so it's not like your iPad, your phone, your Apple TV, like, it blocks it off everything. But the new app that I'm really impressed with is called Bark, BARK.us. And what I really appreciate is that it's using a lot of AI, artificial intelligence, which sounds like robots.
Yeah.
I want to go see that movie by Will Smith as I say that again. But what it does is it takes, so let's say you're running it and your kid is on social media and there is language that is used by groomers.
Right.
Just, send me a nude.
Phrases, yeah. Okay.
But it knows those phrases, and if it sees anything that way, it sends you an alert.
Wow, I like it.
And I think that is really cool. Now, as your kids get older, I'm a big fan of this, I call it progression. I'm not strangling my kid, but it's like your hands are on your young kids, right? We monitor their music, their television, even like YouTube is not just full YouTube. It might be a kid's YouTube. Then they become middle schoolers. I now have 2 high school kids. Like, they have no curfews, because when my daughter goes to Western next year, right? She's 18. Like, I want her to know how to live life. And the same goes with our phones. You probably shouldn't be checking your kids' text messages at 18, and we could have another conversation about that. But Bark looks at sex trafficking, pornography, blocks things. I just love that kind of app, and I think it's a great one for anyone to look at. And the website, I think, is I actually have it up here. Let me just check. Bark.us.
Oh, that's great, because for, obviously people watching this that are parents can use this information, but also if they work with youth and children, they're talking to the parents of the youth and children, and now they have some great information to give them because, for example, one of the things we're seeing is a huge increase on child sexual assault. So parents need to be aware of what their kids are looking at on what devices and when, and now they have some ideas about how to monitor that. So
yeah,
that's great. So it's BARKS?
Bark.us. Yeah.
Okay, bark.us. Okay, gotcha. All right. Were you trying to pull something up there, or?
No, just making sure it's the right URL I gave you.
Okay.
Bark.us.
Bark.us. Good. All right. Well, thanks again, Brett. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise and knowledge. And, I know you've spoken to literally thousands and thousands of people, and you're very, very well read on this. And I encourage everyone to get that book. It looks fantastic. And go to your website. There's a lot of great resources on there as well. And down the road, I hope we can do some more of these chats. And next time you're up in Peterborough, let me know. I'll buy you a coffee at Starbucks.
Love to.
All right, take care.